Hello world, and welcome back. In this section, we are covering the most important interview question. Now, this question, when do you get it? It's usually the first question you're going to get from your interviewer. And it comes in many forms. You might hear, hey, tell me a little bit about yourself, or what have you been up to lately? But really, all versions of this first question you're going to get can be encapsulated in this one question. How did you contribute to the success of your most recent project? Let me say that again. How did you contribute to the success of your most recent project? Why is this the most important interview question? Well, for starters, candidates can get hired based solely on the answer to this question. Now, I have a great story about this. There was a candidate, he came in, he seemed like an average candidate, but his resume seemed kind of interesting. In fact, when I asked him, how did you contribute to the success of your most recent project? His answer was pretty astounding. He gets right out of his chair, jumps up to the whiteboard, and starts drawing pictures. He starts labeling things. He starts describing for me that the company he was working at was to compete in the router industry, compete directly against Cisco, against their top tier backbone routers for the internet. And as he started to describe what it did, and specifically what he was doing on the project, by the way, it was based on the open source PDP-11 software, which was ancient. I thought it was quite interesting that his company was using software that's been around for a very long time to build the next generation of routers. Massively parallel, capable of sitting right on the backbone and directing traffic. Well, as he was answering this question, he didn't hesitate. He was capable of going into a lot of detail about what he was working on, about the specific challenges that he ran into, about the features of the product and how it compared to the other product that he was going to be, this product was going to be going up against. But his amount of detail, his expertise in communicating to me what he was doing was astounding. See, I knew within a couple moments of him describing what he was doing that he was qualified for the position, and I knew that I was going to give him a strong hire recommendation. At the end of the interview, when I got around to sending the email to the recruiter about the candidate, I said, yeah, no, this guy is amazing, and he's definitely a strong hire for this position. In fact, you should also submit this candidate to positions in the research department, in any positions that were specifically difficult to fill. He had a solid understanding of data structures and algorithms. And anyways, I knew within the first couple minutes, like he was a ringer. So that's why this question is so important. That's one of the first reasons why it's important. You can get hired based on your ability to describe how you contributed to the success of your most recent projects. The second reason why this question is so important, it sets the tone for the rest of the interview. I mentioned earlier in one of the videos that the manager wants to ask you questions you can answer. Well, this is how it begins. Your ability to answer this question is paramount. If you're able to go into detail without hesitation, if you're able to talk about your past work experience for, say, 6 months back or even a year, like that's impressive. You'd be amazed at how many candidates come in who are unprepared to answer this question. The other reason why this question is really important is the depth and breadth of a candidate's answer for this. That communicates his passion and enthusiasm. And why is that important? Well, early on in my career at Microsoft, I'd be preparing to go out to an interview, and I'd get a call from the recruiter in last minute, like, Do you have any questions? Maybe they would give a little additional information they might have acquired from the last time I talked to them to share with me about the position. And one of the last things they would say is, show them how enthusiastic and passionate you are about what the team is doing. They wouldn't even, come to think of, they might not even say what the team is doing. They would just say, be excited, be enthusiastic, be passionate about, when you go into the interview. And I interpreted this as that I needed to somehow communicate to the manager that I was a good fit for the role that I was going to be doing. But the problem with this was that I didn't know the details of what the job requirements were. Now, I've seen the job description, it was posted on the web, but one of the things that maybe not a lot of candidates know is some agencies, some companies, they'll put together a boilerplate template of a job description and put that up as a wide net to get as many candidates as they can into that position or even just to visit the company. But the problem with this is they usually lack detail specifically about what the candidate will be doing. Also, there might be non-disclosure agreements. There might be specific things associated with the project schedule. Whatever the reasons might be, they just don't divulge that information in a job description. So I didn't know that what the position would be, but somehow I'm supposed to be passionate, enthusiastic about that work. I did my best. I got jobs, and there were some jobs that I didn't get, but I missed the point. Until I started interviewing candidates, I finally realized that that this question about passion and enthusiasm is not about the potential for you to succeed in the future. You don't know. The manager might, but you don't know what role or what capacity that you'll play. So what I noticed was that when candidates, like the candidate writing the massively parallel router, he was able to talk about his past experience, his past contributions in such detail and at such depth that that's when I recognized that passion and enthusiasm isn't about what you'll succeed in the future. It's about what you've succeeded and how you've contributed to the success of the projects you've worked on in the past. So again, to communicate your passion and enthusiasm, you have to be able to answer the first question you get, the most important question: how did you contribute to the success of your most recent project? Now, another point related to why this question is so significant is managers will evaluate your future success based on your past successes. Again, this is really important. They're the one that's going to be doing the math, adding up whether or not there is a role in their organization that matches what you're really good at. And when you can communicate how you've contributed in the past, that is what communicates how you'll be successful in the future, at least immediately. They want to hire you so that you can hit the ground running. Now, there will be a chance for you to grow and learn new skills and be successful, but be and know that when they hire you into a position, they want you to be successful right off the bat. You want to be able to contribute. Now, here's another really great point about this. It doesn't seem very obvious, but of all the questions you're going to get in your interview, this is the only one you can't get wrong. There is no right answer. Okay, you can get this wrong if you don't or can't talk about your past work experience. If you can't talk about the role that you played and how you contributed, that's a problem. But beyond that, you've got the stage. You have the opportunity to go into detail and talk about your work experience, and you can't get it wrong. Again, I just have to say it again. You can't get this one wrong. You just need to be able to answer it easily and without hesitation. Your enthusiasm and your passion will come out in your ability to answer this question. Now, I want to tell you a story about when I first arrived at Volt Technical Resources, where I created a program to increase the quality of candidates being submitted to positions at Microsoft and Amazon and Orbitz and Accenture and at Volt as well, what I first noticed when I was doing my research, because I wanted to improve the process, I created a scalable pipeline for candidate processing as it went through. We could scale up any particular section. If we needed more recruiters, we could do that without taking a hit on the managers. If candidates weren't passing the bar, they wouldn't pass me. I could give feedback to the recruiters without being a hit on the managers. It was a really great program. But when I first started out trying to understand what the needs were, I was taken by this weird statistic, which was we didn't have any candidates in the system that were not employed that had over 5 interviews. Now, that was really curious to me. Why is that the case? Why is it that candidates got an offer by the 5th job interview that they went on? Was it because the recruiters had finally figured out what kind of candidates to submit? Was it because the recruiters figured out what to tell the candidates? What about, did the candidates figure out the types of questions that they would be asked? What I realized was that it's this first question. When a candidate gets asked, hey, what have you been up to? That when they are capable of talking about their past work experience without hesitation, they light up. They actually have a transformation, a physical change in their body when they start talking about their past work experience. And by the 5th job that they've gone on, let's say they've interviewed with maybe 4 or 5 interviewers or managers for each position. So by the 5th job that they've gone on, they've answered this question 20 or 25 times. They've become an expert at being able to talk about how they contributed to the success of their most recent project. And going back to the PDP-11 guy, oh man, it was clear. He was ready to be placed into a position, and there was no hesitation that he would be rock solid and a good contributor. So again, this question, you can't underestimate how valuable and important and significant it is for you to be able to answer this without hesitation. If you get a phone call from a potential job seeker, a headhunter, a recruiter, and they want to interview you, take it, practice, become like an expert, be prepared to talk about your past experience and get that practice in, because when you get into that interview, you're going to be ready to answer that question. And because it sets the tone for the rest of the interview, and all of the questions like get spawned from this one question, you're going to make your life a lot easier. It's really important. Now, you'd be amazed at how many candidates are unprepared to answer this question. I had a candidate that he was a software engineer, and he's a quality assurance engineer specifically. And I started asking him, like, okay, what goes into the body of a good bug report? His answer was, I don't know. And I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe he just hasn't worked in a while and he's forgotten these important details. So I asked him, well, when was the last time that you were working? And he's like, I'm still employed today. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe he's been on vacation. When was the last time you were at work? Yesterday. I'm like, and you can't tell me what goes into the body of a good bug report? This was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. What's important is that he demonstrated that he didn't care about the work that he was doing. Managers and interviewers want to hire you to do work you care about. And if you can't remember the details, such as, hey, a good bug report starts off with a clear and descriptive title. And priority and severity, those are really important points too. You have to have that in a bug. If you can't even talk about the basics of what it takes to do your job, no one's going to want to hire you to do that type of work. So, again, it's amazing how many candidates are unprepared But of course, they get the practice. They go on enough interviews. They get really good at answering that question. You don't have to do that. You can practice before you go to the interview. You can be prepared for this question and knock it out of the park. Now, what are candidates afraid of? Are they afraid of boring the manager? The reason why I'm asking this is do candidates think that, look, my work experience, it's not really that important? Well, there was a candidate that I was interview prepping, and she had gone to some boot camps. She showed initiative, and she was doing everything to become a developer, and she was looking for opportunities to write code as an engineer. Now, she was a software tester at a game company, and she was kind of ashamed of that work. She wanted to get out of software testing because the type of testing she was doing wasn't growing her skill set as a developer. Now, I told her, I said, look, you have to feel proud of the work that you've done. You have to be able to talk about it and not be ashamed of that work. Because even though managers want to hire you for what you're good at, if you show that you have initiative, that you're moving into another field of work or engineering, that they're going to want to take advantage of that enthusiasm and that determination, and they're going to want to grow that. So I prepped her. She got a job as a developer. I was so excited for her. It was one of those good stories. So when she went into that interview, she wasn't ashamed. She wasn't afraid of talking about how she contributed to the success as a software quality assurance engineer. And I believe that contributed to her success. So are candidates afraid of boring the manager with these details, of being able to go into detail and at great depth and with a great amount of history? Well, the answer is no. Here's why. See, being able to talk about your past contributions allows you to stand out. It separates you from other candidates that don't have your experience. If you avoid generalizing your answers, and if you can talk in detail specifically about the capacity and the role that you played and how it contributed to the success, then compare you with another candidate who's coming in who doesn't have that experience but has the same resume and is interviewing for the same position. They're going to want to generalize too because they don't have the background. They don't have the qualifications for the position, but you do. Your ability to talk into detail separates you from that other candidate. Talk in detail because you can. It's really important. Now, I might be saying it's really important a lot of times in the next two videos. So I hope people don't create drinking games related to this, but a lot of the things I'm going to be covering are really important and significant. So let's talk about the next point. This question, how did you contribute to the success of your most recent project, allows you to talk about the what, the why, the when, the where, the who of the work that you've done. Your ability to paint a picture of how your role contributed to the overall project is like an amazing ability. Again, not all candidates are prepared to do this. So your ability to do it is going to separate you from those other candidates, and it's going to give you an advantage. Also, be prepared to provide specific examples where appropriate of a story, of something related to that job where, it stands out. Now, standing out, I'm not saying that you have to be prepared to talk about how you saved the world or that what you did was amazing. No, in fact, it's the mundane details of what it took to do your job every day that the team relied upon that allowed the project to be successful. Hey, if you're a janitor and you're part of the team and your job was to collect the garbage and clean the tables and wash the dishes, and that's what enabled this project to be successful, then be proud of that. Those are really good contributions. What I'm trying to say here is a lot of times candidates take for granted what it takes to do their job, and they think they need to be sharing some impossible aspect of how they contributed. They don't. Your ability to talk about the mundane role and the tasks related to do your job is something that somebody else who wants to generalize and take that position, they won't be able to do. Only you can do it because you've done it, because you're capable of talking in that level of detail. Now, let's talk about presentation strategies related to this question. Don't talk about the project, the team, or the company and what it does and they do. You need to talk about you. The manager wants to hire you. He doesn't want to hire the team. How is this a strategy? Well, the strategy is talk in the first person. Use I, not we. I opened bugs that I found against the product, and I tracked the bugs through the bug lifecycle to completion, either getting the bug fixed, regressing the bug, and closing the bug, or signing off that the bug didn't need to be fixed for a particular release. Well, that's what every tester does. But the fact that you could enumerate those details represents that you have a broader knowledge of what your role was and how significant it was to the success of the product. If you weren't there, somebody would have to do it, or the project wouldn't be successful. Again, it's the mundane details that are important. Now, talk about yourself. Describe how you contributed to the success. That's kind of the example that I just gave. It meets those requirements. But again, talk about yourself from the first person. Use I, not we. Now, one last point related to presentation strategies. Speak as if you are teaching the manager how to do your job. Pretend that you're about to go on vacation and you need to give your role to the manager, to the interviewer, so that they can do your job while you're away. That's kind of the level of detail we're talking about. So, okay, well, every Monday we have a stand-up meeting and we look through the current active items and the items that are on the backlog, and we decide what's going to be going into the sprint. That's the first thing that I do in the week. We have sprints and stand-ups. Then what I do is I sit down, I reimage a machine, and load up the software, install it, I test the setup, and I look for bugs, localization bugs, I look for functionality bugs, I look to make sure the product is installed correctly. You see where I'm going with this? It's these mundane details, again, that we take for granted and that we would expect any tester to do. But there are people interviewing for the same position that can't do this. And the thing that will set you apart is being able to do this. All right. In the next item, we're going to talk about preparation strategies. For instance, one mistake that candidates make is that they prepare for the hard questions. Oh, they stay up all night and they try to learn some new API or some new framework because they think, oh my gosh, that was a requirement on the job description, and they're not going to hire anybody if they don't have these skills. But the problem is, because this first question will be the question that sets the tone for the rest of the interview, if you instead are prepared to talk about your past contributions and the technologies you used and the APIs and the frameworks, they're going to ask you about that. They're not going to ask you about the things that you don't know. Now, we talked about in an earlier section that managers want to hire candidates that are going to do work that they already know. They're going to ask you questions that you already know the answer to. The only way the manager can evaluate the risk of extending you an offer is based on what you do know. That's why this question is so important, because you open up with the things that you're prepared to talk about in detail, and the rest of the interview is yours. Now, as a preparation prior to the interview, my recommendation is take your resume and for every item that you have listed, create a backstory to it. Now, this document is going to be a study document, a reference document for you to go over prior to speaking with recruiters about possible positions, when you have an informational interview, or just prior to going into your interview. You're sitting in the lobby. You pull out this document, you reread all the details related to all of the items that are listed on your resume, and you go into the interview and you'll be better prepared to answer this question. Now, for each of these detailed sections, be prepared or list the responsibilities, your contributions, your ownership, the length of employment, those kind of raw details, what you did on the team. Write a story. Pick a particular day or a memory that you have about the work that you did and write that down as a story. Then as soon as the manager pulls up that one point, it would be like, oh yeah, I'm totally ready to talk about this. I can't wait to tell you and how excited I am that I did this work on this job. Now also, you want to list the applications you used, the tools, the languages, the APIs, the frameworks to execute your role. Don't list all of those items that the entire team was using. Only include the items that you used on a daily basis. Now, you might think, well, if I put all these terms on here, because technically our team was doing it, and I might have looked at the code one time, or I might have had a conversation in the kitchen, that means, I'm going to show up in more search results for the recruiters. That might be the case, but it actually dilutes the key things that you're really good at. And it lays landmines for you to step on later. In the interview, the manager might look at your resume and say, hey, can you tell me about the Active Directory Services API? Or, what parts of the API did you use? Well, I didn't actually do that. That was somebody else's job on the team. I've had that in interviews from candidates. It was really sad because it takes away time in the interview. If the interviewer starts asking you questions about things you don't know, and if you end up tragically guessing at the interviews, and if you end up tragically not saying I don't know, then you might spend half of the interview trying to answer questions about technologies and APIs that you have no actual work experience using. By the end of the interviewer is going to be unable to mitigate that risk that you need him to mitigate to extend you an offer. So only put things on your resume that you are willing to talk about, that's work that you've done, and that has a scope, has an end to it. Because at one point, they're going to dive down in that rabbit hole, and there's going to be a bottom. And when you reach that bottom, that's when you say, I don't have any experience with that part. I didn't use it. And it allows the interview to continue and for time to be spent on the things that you actually know. So again, review this document every time before you do a phone interview, every time you're about to go out to an interview. Update your resume at the end of every assignment and provide that detailed story, that detailed description. You're going to thank yourself in the future when it comes time to answer the most important interview question. Now, let's cover some items that I call candidate curiosities. Basically, questions that I get from candidates about what they should put on the resume or how they should approach or answer questions in the interview. And one of the first items is, how far back should I go? This is good. This is a great question. You should only include things on your resume that you can talk about. If you're unprepared and the manager decides to pick a topic from your resume, directly from your resume, and you can't talk about it, that's just going to increase the risk. It's going to erode the trust between you and the interviewer, and it's going to prevent the interviewer from understanding the risk of extending you an offer. It won't work in your favor. The next question that I get asked is, do I start with the most recent work experience? Yes, you do. It'll be the most recent work that you've done that the manager or the interviewer is going to want to hire you to do. So put that at the top of your resume, have it in descending order for the date of your work experience, and let the first thing the manager reads and the interviewer reads be the thing that you could be hired tomorrow to do. It goes without saying, it's really important. Now, the next question I get is, what amount of experience is most relevant? I think what this question is getting at is, how much should I include on the resume? Should I only include the last 6 months or the last 2 years? Well, my resume is about 4 pages long. I think that it's more important for an interviewer and a manager to be able to search your resume effectively to find the kinds of work that you've done in the past and the different ways that you've contributed. And some managers, some interviewers, I've heard them say, look, I only look at the first page of a resume. If it's multiple pages, I don't really care. Well, the good thing is if you follow the advice to put the most recent experience in descending order, and therefore it arrives and exists on the first page, you're set. You're good to go. It's going to set the discussion. It'll be the opportunity for you to talk about what you're prepared to talk about. Now, if you're not prepared to talk about it, should you remove it from your resume? Of course. I said it earlier. It should be obvious. I know that you think, or I know that many candidates think, that they should put every abbreviation, every term, every technology on their resume that had anything to do with the work that they were doing. But it dilutes the quality of the content you have on your resume. It lays the landmines and the traps for you to snare yourself in later during the interview. And it will increase the chances that you'll end up talking about something that you know nothing about, preventing the manager from mitigating the risk and extending you an offer. Now, the next question I get is, how short is a job experience too short to put on a resume? It's simple. If you don't have demonstrable contributions that you've made, if it's a 2-week project and you didn't make any contributions, don't include it. If it was a 2-week project and you contributed in a significant way, include it. It's as simple as that. I want to touch on one last thing, and it has to do with exaggeration. It has to do with embellishment of your work experience. You don't need to do it. And here's why. I'm really glad I remembered this. It's a really important moment. I remember that when candidates start to answer this question about their previous work experience, something happens. A physical change in their body occurs. It's as if they have an out-of-body experience when they start recalling the work they've done in the past. Or you might know there's a thing called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And what happens is sometimes there's an uncontrollable response from someone who is suffering from it when it gets triggered. Well, the reverse is happening in this case. When a candidate thinks about the things that they've enjoyed doing, when they can recall in detail about the work that they've done in the past, they get transported there. It's like, it's incredible. Their breathing changes. Their speech changes, the cadence of the words they say. Even the fact that I'm sharing these things with you today, I'm I'm kind of having an out of body experience. These things are so important that when I tell you these stories, you might notice maybe my voice changes or maybe my interest or my inflections change. You're able to assess the quality of the content that I'm sharing with you today because I'm sharing real things that happen to me. This will happen with you in the interview. When you are able to talk about your past experience, when you do talk about it, it will change how you communicate. It sends a different signal. I've noticed candidates, they're really nervous. They'll come in and they kind of don't have a reference point. And then all of a sudden you ask them about, hey, tell me about what you were doing on this project. Oh, they become relaxed. They start to smile. They relax. And they start to smile. It happens multiple times. It's really an amazing change that happens. So, look, it's a good thing for you to be able to talk about your past experience. Be proud of it. Don't be ashamed. It's the mundane details that separates you from the other candidates. It's the opportunity to set the tone for the rest of the interview. And it's the only question you can't get wrong. In the next section, we're going to be covering core patterns, strategies for mitigating risk. I am really looking forward to this section. Just like the one we had, what's the most important interview question you'll get? It's meaty. It's got a lot of content, and it will help you perform better in your interviews. I'll see you then.